Today, our first speaker is John, and John currently works at BiggerPockets, but this journey is soon coming to an end, and he'll be working at Dynatrace, and he'll be developing the best Ruby Edge client for you, so you can use it freely and improve your observability, because John is one of the observability experts in our community. And he'll tell us about how to fix production bugs 20, but I also heard 25 times faster. So, John, please give it a warm welcome, and the stage is yours.
Thank you. So, I'm going to talk about how to fix your production bugs 20 times faster. So, I work for a real estate company called BiggerPockets, based in the US. And the following is based on a true story. Names have been changed to protect the innocent, or in some cases, guilty. So stop me if this sounds familiar. It's Friday afternoon, and I'm on call. And I get a Slack notification. That's a bit strange. It's from support. What's going on here? Okay, and another one. There's a bit of a problem. We've got an emergency on our hands. So we'll search the logs, and we'll, oh, that's a bit weird. That's not very good, but we'll check the code. It'll be obvious what's going wrong. Emails are not getting through, password reset emails not getting through, so let's check. And that looks kind of okay, which doesn't really help me. Meanwhile, things are escalating. Customers are complaining, they're taking to Twitter, and they can't get their password reset emails. They're actually locked out of their accounts. So this is a bit of an emergency. So I'm doing something else, but I'll drop everything I'm doing because we all like context switching, right? It's brilliant. So I'll pair with a colleague, and we'll add some error logging to the background job that sends these password reset emails. And while we're waiting for it to deploy, what? It's fixed. It's okay. I mean, that seems a bit weird, but we'll fix it later. We'll add it to the backlog. Actually, that's not the backlog. This is the backlog. It's a bit, in fact, no, that's not the backlog. That's the backlog. So as I was saying, we'll add it to the backlog just there, and that will get done. Don't know when that will get done. Probably really soon. And after all, it's only a one-off issue, right? It's not going to happen again. And yeah, okay, it's happening again. So we've got the same problem, and the support team are completely overwhelmed at this point. But it's no worries at all, because we added that background job logging. So we'll just search the logs, and oh no, not again. Okay, it's fine. We'll go to the sidekick background job queue processing admin dashboard, and that what does that tell me? It's got some processed. Not really sure what that really tells me. Not much. And so at BiggerPockets, we're in this vicious cycle. We'd add a little bit of extra logging, kind of guess what the problem was, and then it would kind of go away, and then it would come back, and customers were getting annoyed, and it was just really a bad experience for everybody. And we were banging our head against a brick wall. So when I come across a problem like this, I think, well, maybe it's just us. Let's go a bit wider. So I asked 50 engineers this question. Basically, how often do you encounter issues that you don't have visibility on? And the results kind of surprised me. It turns out about half engineers I surveyed say once a month, and another third say once a week. Okay, so not just us then. And next I want to talk about feelings. As engineers, we maybe don't want to talk about feelings too much. We like data, and we like hard things, but feelings are also obviously very important. So the first feeling I have is just annoyed. Like seriously, in 2025, this is what we've got to go through to just understand what our app is doing. And then I'm just start to get a bit bored. Like I'm going through the logs, I'm looking at stack trace. I keep going through the same 3 tabs in Google Chrome over and over again, expecting some revelation. And then the pressure kicks in. Maybe it's been an hour, 2 hours since this production outage, and I still can't fix it. And then I start to think, hang on, maybe the problem's with me. Maybe I'm the problem here. Maybe I'm just not a very good engineer. But hang on, I've been working with Rails for 15 years now, and I've got to go to my boss and say, oh, I know you're paying me all this money, but sorry, I can't figure it out. It's not a great look, is it, really? So if this sounds familiar, I've got some good news. It's not you, and you're not alone. And while I've been at Bigger Pockets, I've developed a 5-step process to help with this problem. First of all, we talk about what question we want answered. Then we decide on the data we want to gather, we build the instrumentation, we use the graphs, and then we improve. And if you turn it on its side, it looks like some steps. So I call it the Steps to Observable Software, or SOS. So let's walk through these steps with the example that I've just given. First of all, we want to talk about the question we want answered. Now, the obvious question is, why are these password reset emails not being sent? So that's pretty vague. We can't create any graph that's going to answer that directly. So instead of that, we need to come up with some hypotheses. Why might it be going wrong? It could be failing, the jobs could be timing out, they might be being delayed. So we know it's not failing because we checked in Sentry, nothing there. They're not timing out, so maybe they're delayed. And they may or may not be. This is just a guess. Let's try and prove the guess correct or incorrect. So just to recap, here's the theory. Here's what a healthy queue might look like. The green jobs are our password reset email jobs. And here's what we think is happening in the queue. We think these green jobs are being pushed down and being delayed by a whole slew of other jobs that are coming in before them, right? So let's try and figure out if that is what's going on or not. So in order to do that, we need to find a more specific question. The specific question is, what jobs are taking time in the within 5 minutes queue? That is something we can answer. So let's decide what data we want to gather to answer that question. And when I think about this, I think in terms of roughly 4 dimensions. What event do we want to gather? What do we want to filter that event by? What do we want to group it by? And what do we want to plot the values of? So the event is when any job has been performed. We want to filter by the job queue. So we want to see all the jobs performed within a certain queue. We want to group it by job class, and we want to see the aggregates of the duration. So that means we can see the duration per job class in that queue. And if all of this seems a bit kind of overwhelming, I like to convert it to SQL. It's really just a SQL statement that you're writing on events. Okay, so much for that. Now we come to the actual building of the instrumentation. So I'm going to cover these 4 things. And the first thing I'm going to cover is why logs? Like, what should we use? Should we use traces, logs, metrics? There's a lot of confusion out there about this. If anybody says to you, these are the 3 pillars of observability, run a mile, because they're not pillars. They're different data types. And in my take, traces are the best and metrics are essentially the worst. There's use cases for all 3 of them. We're going to start with logs because logs are most familiar to developers, and big improvements are coming in Rails 8.1 for structured logging. Okay? So the next question is, do we use plain logs or structured logs? Well, the title of the talk is Power of Structured Logging, so I'm all sure you can guess what we're going to use here, but I want to explore why we use that and what are structured logs anyway. Here's what a plain text log looks like. Hopefully this looks fairly familiar. It's a string, goes to the logs, no big deal. But you can see the data here is just smushed into the string. Okay? Here's what it would look like in your observability tool of choice. It will be a single column just saying performed action mailer, mailer job in whatever. So how do we find all the action mailer jobs? Well, we have to use a regular expression because it's just a plain string. Okay, so far so good. What about if I want to see anything that's over a second in duration? How are we going to do that with a regular expression? Oh, that's right, we can't. So this is not very useful. And I still see people running Rails apps with plain old logs without any structure to them. It blows my mind. How you do it, I don't know, because I've not figured out how to do that. So this isn't very good. This isn't great. Here's a structured log. Now, the first thing you'll notice is it looks really weird. I don't see many logs in my code base looking like this. But this is the way forwards. Why? Because you can show those attributes as a column. So the attributes are just in essentially a hash. But what you're doing here is building up attributes of data, a little bit like a database. So you can show those attributes as columns, and then you can filter by any attribute. You can group by it, you can sort by it, and the tool understands this is a specific data type and it's a specific attribute. So this is nice. We like this. Next of all, I want to talk about what logging library to use. There are many, many improvements coming in Rails 8.1, but they're not here yet. And obviously, many of you in this room may be using Rails prior to 8. So here are my criteria. They're pretty subjective. Some of them are not. So can it log structured payload? Does it integrate with Rails? Is there some great documentation? That bit is quite subjective. And is it mature? So before I go through all the options, I just want to say thank you to everybody who works on open source software in any way, shape, or form. Our community would not exist without you all, obviously, so massive thank you. Having said all of that, here's how it shakes out. So Semantic Logger is the best one that I've come across. I've also excluded anything from this slide that is maybe less than a year old. So there are some logging tools that are coming up that are quite promising, but they're just not quite mature enough yet for production use. We've been using Semantic Logger for 3 years now, Bigger Pockets in production, and it's solid as a rock. So let's actually use Semantic Logger. And so you install Rails Semantic Logger, install Semantic Logger. It's got Rails bindings, of course. You set the format as JSON, and it gives you some automatic logging out of the box. So here are all the libraries that it works with. I'm just going to focus on active job because we're doing background job processing. So here is what the output might look like from Semantic Logger. You'll see it's nicely structured. We have our event name here. We've got the job class and queue here, which are the other attributes we care about. And finally, we have the duration. Okay, so we're all good. We just install that. And like all these observability vendors say, including Dynatrace, you click a box, you install our library, then everything just works. That's the dream, right? Well, not quite. There are a few things that this does not do, and many more besides, but these are the main 3. So there is 3 weaknesses. The first thing is no conventions. We're all sat here because Rails compelled us with the convention over configuration idea, right? However, that principle hasn't been brought through to logs yet. And so all of these things are equivalent for attribute names. Choose whatever you like. If I'm working on a team with somebody else, it's fine. We'll just work in our little silos, and you create your attribute, and I'll create mine, and then they won't work with each other. No, that doesn't sound like such a good plan, does it? So enter OpenTelemetry. This is a set of standards. It's one of the fastest growing projects, and it's now overtaken Kubernetes. One of the fastest CNCF projects, I should say. So the OTel library for Ruby isn't that mature yet. I wouldn't suggest using it directly in production. Some people are. But what we can use from OpenTelemetry is the semantic conventions, which don't require you to install anything. They're a set of naming conventions for attributes. And so here you can see this is the official name for job queue name. It's a bit weird. It's like messaging destination name. For reasons that will remain nameless, the OpenTelemetry community has decided background jobs are a messaging protocol. So it's the same thing as Kafka, Redis, Kafka, RabbitMQ. So anyway, that's a name. And so out of the box, this is what Semantic Logger will give you. And when you format it for OpenTelemetry, this is what you get. So the names are all standard, and you can now start to switch between different observability tools, and we've got a convention that everybody can agree on. So let's change the code. And to do this, it's a little bit hacky, so just bear with me. We find the code inside Semantic Logger that does this work. We copy that class into our code base. We need to change the payload event of the event formatter. And then finally, we swap out our subscriber for the Semantic Logger subscriber. I can go through this in detail, come and speak to me afterwards, but the point is, it's a bit messy, but it can be done. And so with that, Semantic Logger now spits out something like this, which is great. The next problem is we've got missing attributes. So a whole load of things that Semantic Logger does not give you out of the box that are kind of essential. So these kind of things it doesn't give you out of the box. So headers, it doesn't automatically log any HTTP headers. Now, I don't really understand how anyone can run an app in production and not have these things logged. It's kind of critical, but people do it. So I just want to show you a very small way of logging some of these things, and we're just going to focus on two: the headers and the user agent. And we do this thing called config.log tags. In our application RB, we can define a hash, and these are tags that get included in every request. And they get sent to Semantic Logger, and therefore they get sent to your observability tool. As you can see here, we've got two different ways of doing this. We've got a Lambda syntax. It passes in the request, and then you can call methods on the request. And then secondly, you've got a more compact format. And this essentially calls user agent as a method on request. So it's less flexible, but it's more compact. This is just for a straight mapping. And when you do this, here is the output in the logs. You can see we've got some HTTP request headers, and we've got a user agent. So that's nice. The final thing I'm going to talk about is API requests are missing. So to simplify this, I'm going to assume you're all using Faraday, which, as we all know, is the best HTTP client, right? Yeah? Okay, good. Glad I've got you on board with that one. And we're going to define some middleware. That middleware essentially logs when a response comes back from any API request you make. It will log all these kind of attributes, the URL and the duration, all sorts of other useful things. And then we can register that and use it in any API request we make. And this means we get to see all the API requests that are coming into our app and all the ones that are leaving our app, which is incredibly useful. And here's what it looks like in the logs. So we've covered 3 of the biggest weaknesses. There are a lot more that I won't go into today. And the final step of building is actually to send it. So we've logged all our stuff internally. Now it's time to send it to our observability tool. Semantic Logger here has you covered. This is one of my favorite features of Semantic Logger, this idea of appenders. So you can set up an appender here. I'm going to go off and work for Dynatrace, as mentioned before. So we'll create a little HTTP appender, and this will batch all our logs, make an API request to Dynatrace. That will ingest the logs, and it's all good to go. And this is what it might look like in Dynatrace. So you can see the logs on the left there, and then on the right here, you can see like the structured version of each one of those individual logs. And then you can sort and search and filter by it in the top bar. Okay, so that was a lot. Bit of a whirlwind tour of how to build. This QR code will give you a link to my link tree, and you can get slides. Just come up and speak to me afterwards. I'll show the QR code at the end as well. But come and speak to me afterwards if you want any more detail on any of that. So the final thing we need to do is the actual exciting bit. We've done all the boring work of coding and all the rest of it, which we all agree is incredibly dull. Maybe not. But we get to actually use the graphs now. So here's a reminder of all the attributes. And we're going to set the time range. Okay? And now we're going to see all the jobs performed. So you can see up here, we're searching for everything within that queue. Okay. Next, we're going to group by the duration of job class. Okay. And here's what we get. This is nice. You can actually see which jobs take the most time. Final step is to improve. So there's a whole bunch of things that we've already done that are not ideal. But generally speaking, I find it's helpful to criticize the work I've already done. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I get a whole load of improvements from that. I show colleagues what I've done, and I get to learn what they want. So very often, I've had the experience of, oh, I've made this cool graph in Datadog, and people's eyes just kind of glaze over. And they say, well, I don't really care about that. And so, oh, okay, what do you care about? Oh, well, we've got this thing in production, and we can't figure out what it is. And so then we can apply those same principles to their problem. And this is how you get buy-in from other people at your company to improve this stuff. Show them what's possible in a tiny little slice, and then give them the tools to make what they care about observable. And so we might want to add other attributes at this point. We might want to add job latency or IPs or request IDs. We've gone around this cycle a lot at BiggerPockets. I've been working on this for about 2 years now. And I want to revisit our original real example with what's our experience now if this were to happen. So I'm still on call, sadly. It's still Friday. However, I now get a different Slack message, and it's a lot earlier. It's on Friday morning now. And this message is from our monitoring tool. That's a bit strange, so I click the link, and here's what I see. It sends me to a graph. What is that blue line doing? That's really strange. Oh, wow, the within 5 minutes job queue has now a latency of 15 minutes, so it's breached its SLA. So what's a question I want to answer? Okay, which jobs are taking the most time? So we'll go to the logs, we'll search for jobs performed. Within that queue, we'll group by job class, we'll plot the duration, and here it is. Okay. So it's clearly the analytics update user visits job that's taking all the time. What the heck is that? That's interesting. I've just learned something about my software in seconds, not even minutes. Okay, that's the answer. So what's then queuing those jobs? I'm curious. We search for the event jobs enqueued. Within that queue, let's group by HTTP resource, which is a combination of the controller and the action. And here's what we get. What's that? That green bar looks interesting. It's the profile show controller. So it's the show action in profiles control. That's a bit strange. I wasn't expecting that. Okay. What IP address is hitting that action, which is then queuing the jobs? So let's show the number of HTTP requests to that same resource, and we'll group it by IP address. Oh, wow, that's a lot of IPs in that light blue region. Oh, that's the IP address. Okay, I've got it. So let's just recap. There's a scraper at that IP address. It's hitting profiles show, it's flooding the queue with these jobs, and that delays our password reset emails. This is actually what happened. Real life example. And the fix is pretty simple. We now block that IP in our infrastructure, and now we've blocked it, takes a few seconds, we can check, is it fixed? We go back to the graph, oh, it's back to normal. And we're done. Just another Tuesday at the office. So that was maybe 5 minutes, 7 minutes in total. No real disruption to production work, no tickets, no backlog, just a few little graphs, a few little queries, and we can actually understand what's really going on. How does this feel? Well, as you can imagine, it feels joyful. It feels like I have a superpower. Any bug that comes onto that backlog, I can start to have confidence. I can actually gather data to understand what the heck is going on. And what I didn't anticipate on this journey is it becomes addictive. I start to go into logs, I answer one question, and I'm done with the question. I've got all the data I want, I get my answer, I go back to the code base, I fix it, I push it, I deploy it, and it's all good. I can see it go back down. But in the process, I maybe see something else in another graph, unrelated to this, and I start to get curious. As an example of this recently, I went into a dashboard that we've made, and I saw we've got actually quite a big chunk of 404s. I wonder why that is. Like 2 minutes later, I had my answer. It turns out there's yet another scraper going through all our usernames from AAAAA to A to ZZZZZ, essentially guessing at usernames. And so it's scraping our entire site, occasionally hoping it'll find somebody with a valid username. So again, I blocked those. Our request time dropped by, I think it was 7.1% just from that one change. And again, that would have just gone unnoticed if we hadn't have had observability. So yeah, it gets addictive, and you start to ask questions that you didn't even know you had before. So what's the results of this? Over the last 18 months, we've been able to reduce our downtime by 98%. We now have regular pizza parties where we don't have any downtime at all. Our 500 errors have dropped by 83%. We've still got a lot of errors, but they've improved massively. And most of all, we can now fix bugs 20 times faster. So, if any of this sounds interesting to you, feel free to scan the QR code. There's a whole bunch of articles I've written on there, videos I've done, and there's one or two little paid things, but most of the stuff is free. And if any of this stuff sounds interesting, please grab me. I'm actually going to be leaving today at 4 p.m., sadly, to catch a flight back. But yeah, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. Quick one about the bills for the logs, and a long one about your approaches or rules of thumb when you log stuff on the application side, like operations that run or maybe changes that happen in the database or something like this.
I didn't quite understand that last question, so you may have to repeat it.
Yeah, you've covered the Rails part with all the controllers jobs and stuff, but there is also business logics, and sometimes you want to log some actions on the business logic side, and you didn't cover it, I guess, because everybody does this differently, but I am curious, how do you do this?
Fantastic question. Both really good questions. When you were handed the microphone, I just had this sense he's going to talk about cost. Because cost is such a big issue with zero interest rates going away, and we've heard this a lot, haven't we? So in terms of cost, there's no silver bullet with cost, sadly. I wish there was. There are a few things to say. Number one is, by using open telemetry and starting to embrace the standards way of doing this, you can chop and change between vendors. So if one vendor is getting expensive, you can move to another. That's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is, realistically, a lot of people are locked into a vendor, and it's actually not the open telemetry thing that's hurting them. It's the fact they're locked into alerts, dashboards, and obviously the UI for every one of these tools is different, so there's a big there's a big switching cost even if you are on OpenTelemetry. So OpenTelemetry is going to make it easier and more cost effective for people, but there's still a switching cost. That's the first thing to say. Second thing is I looked at our logs and I did an audit. Generally speaking, I've done this kind of journey towards observability in 2 or 3 companies before my current company, and the pattern is very similar. They're paying a nominal amount of money for some observability tool, nobody's using it, which absolutely boggles my mind. At one company I worked at, I said to them, what's this Kibana thing? And they were like, oh yeah, nobody uses that. I said, how do you know when things are going wrong? They were like, oh, we added a bit of logging and then they were literally like taking a card, there was a problem, they would add 3 lines of logging and then just move it back into the backlog. And they would do that like 6 times. And they were like, well, let's see if it comes up again. Let's see if it comes up again. No, let's not. Let's actually fix it, shall we? But anyway, sorry, that's a bit of a tangent. But the point is, they start out with a tool, they're paying a little bit of money for it, nobody's using it. And then we start to introduce some observability, and it's all going well. And then people go crazy and start logging for this and logging for that and traces, just in case. And then the costs go out of control, and then you get a call from the finance department. Yeah, we're spending like $7,000 a month on this. Do you think you could kind of rein it in a bit? And one of the craziest things I would think we do as a community is we don't connect engineers to the costs. Engineers don't see the costs of, so you never get to see the implications of your decisions, at least the financial implications. Anyway, so, and then they say, right, can you kind of calm it down a bit? So then there's normally a phase of, I kind of look at the logs and see what's being logged and try and reduce it down. So I did a little bit of work at Bigger Pockets to do this, and over 3 days, I reduced the logging bill by 41%. And it turns out we were logging the text okay about 231 million times a month. Not great. So I think a little bit of common sense, and this is why grouping and structured logging is amazing, because you can group by the content key, and some observability tools will show you patterns in your messages, and then you just work down from the top. Like, wow, you're logging this 231 million times. What's going on? And then you can eliminate that. There's a little feature in Semantic Logger where you can pass it a proc which filters out certain logs. So I use that. You can also exclude it from the collector. The final thing to say on the cost thing is only add what you actually need. And this is why this cycle for me is so important, because you're adding something that is an issue for you right now. You're not guessing. I see these companies say, we're going to take 3 months to add observability to our product. We're going to add all these logs, and then nobody uses them. Not a good idea. Start with a problem that you're interested in now and add just enough to answer that problem. So that's the cost thing. Any other questions from people about cost before I move on to the domain stuff? So the domain stuff, I've developed quite a lot of ideas I've not shared in this talk about how to do this. In short, I find it really useful to log or trace domain objects. So let's say you're invoicing a customer, you're creating a new invoice. So I would create a structured version of that invoice object. I like to formatted H. So every domain object in our code base, I try to make it respond to formatted H, which means it responds with a hash. And then I can take that hash and log it, which means then you get all the details about the invoice, the ID, the customer, the address, and now you can start to search your logs, show me all the issues that happened with a specific customer, a specific invoice ID. And then in terms of the actual logic, I mean, you and I can have a chat later about the details of your question, because I don't want to spend too much time.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I have a follow-up question for this what you just said. When you log domain object, how do you deal with privacy with sending data to vendor?
Yeah, great question. There is a Rails feature for this called filter attributes. It's not filter attributes. Parameter filter, thank you, yeah. So you can new up a standard Rails class and pass these attributes through that class, and it'll redact anything. You have some kind of config where you can pass an array of regular expressions or strings for attributes that are private, so things like email address, credit card numbers, all this kind of stuff. And so as part of me sending, as part of our observability pipeline, everything we send to our observability tool gets passed through that call. But it's not obvious how to do that, and nobody really talks about it. So again, come and speak to me afterwards for the details on that. But yeah, it's difficult because you don't want to pepper all your code with all these filter parameters everywhere. So I try to do it in one place, and that's just before it goes to the observability tool. I should also say, depending on the observability tool you use, very often there's redacting functions on their side, but ideally you don't really want to be sending any PII over the wire.
Good. So I have two questions. One is that when you start to walk structured logging and then you have a lot of attributes, then in your experience, can you handle that? So in the backend, you don't specify a schema. So you allow the application to actually send what the developers want to send as different attribute, but then you allow them to aggregate and group based on the type. And
yeah,
can you solve that without forcing some kind of a schema on the backend or on the front end and in general?
In short, no.
Okay.
So there's schema and then schemaless. It's a great question. It's something I've thought an awful lot about, because if you are logging these domain objects by definition are going to be different depending on the different application. So you can't have one set of standards and to rule them all. Now, I am confident and hopeful that OpenTelemetry will start to move into this area of domain objects, maybe in 10 years or something, when they've like tackled all the really gnarly all the other really gnarly problems. Schema.org is a way of marking up web pages with standard attributes based on kind of business objects. So I've been looking at how I could use schema.org for observability, basically. But schema.org is a little bit loosey-goosey with things. It's a little bit generic. In short, I haven't found a good answer to the problem you're proposing. However, you may have seen these tools like Segment and PostHog and Google Analytics, all these analytics tools. Analytics overlaps with observability a lot more than people realize. Analytics is really just observability, and it's the same kind of thing. So for these events, in our code base, I've started to introduce JSON schemas to validate the attributes of domain objects, and that's actually working really well. It means that anything that we're trying to log, it's not logging actually, it's for the event side of things, but anything we try to send to our segment instance is blocked if it doesn't have the correct attributes, and we get an error in Sentry and then we can fix it. So no more nils. But of course the cost is everybody needs to agree on the schema, you need to version the schemas, everybody needs to be in sync with that. And how do you create that? I've had to create massive Notion documents and train people on how to do that. So as we say, nothing comes for free, right? But it's a really interesting topic and area, and I would love to get more into that.
Thank you, that's my experience as well. So, and the other one is that you showed that when you change, you now have alarms based on some criteria on the logs. In your experience, what is the volume of logs that you can use to create alarms compared to metrics? Because metrics are basically like optimization for that. So how long can you go with logs for alarms?
How long can you go with logs?
For using logs to actually trigger alarms, have you experienced that you need to go to metrics because it's too slow to actually query all the logs at 5 minutes, I don't know, at 1 minute? So what's
Yeah.
the volume that you have experienced?
I find a lot of the logging that we do is very high volume. So we have 3 million members on our platform. So if we're logging pretty much anything that's in common use, we'll get hundreds of thousands of logs. So I don't tend to find that problem. I tend to find that the logs rack up, and then I can do aggregations based on the last 5 minutes of like the group and sort by stuff that you saw there. And I set some thresholds. But what I will say is, despite showing you alerts in here, I'm quite reticent to add alerts. They can be really noisy, and then and sometimes noisy alerts are worse than no alerts at all, because then you start ignoring them. And then when there really is a problem, it's the boy who cried wolf syndrome. So alerts are kind of a double-edged sword. I much prefer to explore things and actually build the tools to allow you to ad hoc explore things and just use like alerts as kind of a little bit of seasoning here and there for really, really critical things. Like we're not getting any event through to our segment instance, for example. Our logs are about to breach their quota for the month, things like that. But yeah, we can talk more about the details later.
Thank you.
Okay. Very aware of time here.
So thank you for your talk. You mentioned that traces are the best, and yet your talk is all about logs. So I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on traces, and why, for example, for this problem, is it possible to use traces instead of logs?
Great question, thank you. I really wrestled with this a lot when making this presentation. I have a workshop that I delivered in Krakow earlier this year, where we started out with logging and then moved on to tracing. So we saw the comparison with both of them. I chose logging because it feels a bit more pragmatic. Tracing feels more magical to developers, and I reasoned that there was a lot more to explain. When I say to people structured logging, they generally say, oh, what's that? Yeah, that sounds interesting. Whereas when I say tracing to people, generally I get dead eyes. Yeah, so I do think tracing is the most powerful. The reason is because traces capture context. So in traces, you have a structured tree of events, whereas logs, you have a series of events and there's no nesting. You can't say, show me all the logs that happened in this specific context. I mean, you kind of can, but it gets super involved. Whereas with traces, you can query at any level of the tree. So you can say, show me all the events that were nested inside this other event, essentially. So it gives you that hierarchy. That's really, as I'm demonstrating now, it's very difficult to explain well. That was a terrible explanation, so I do apologize. So again, come up to me afterwards and we can chat more about it in detail. Yeah, this is all possible with traces as well. The other thing with traces is, generally speaking, they're a lot more expensive than logs, and they are a lot slower than logs as well. Again, a lot of people in the SRE community would take issue with what I've said being so blanket. There's times when logs are more expensive than traces, blah, blah, blah. But in general, they're slower and more expensive because the code has to capture all of this context. And then you run into issues around head sampling, tail sampling. How do you keep your tracing costs under control? And that's an even bigger problem than logging costs. So generally speaking, I find logs are the sweet spot. If you've not done observability before, that's like the gateway drug to traces. Start out with logs, add little bits of logs here and there to answer your actual questions that you have today, and then graduate to traces. But yeah, you and I can talk more after, and I can give you the full rundown.
Okay, John, last one?
Yes, absolutely.
So just like a small follow-up question to that, because So I realize that this is about logging and tracing and stuff is out, but since you mentioned you evolved several times through this process, have you jumped to something, like the conclusion I've like sort of jumped to at some point was that it's more of a question of instrumentation versus appending, versus like what you call the appenders. And in fact, you could just instrument one thing that is just, this is an event that happens, and it's independent of if it ends up in a log, in a trace, or a metric later on, which is why it's kind of funny because you see like, you have a very structured payload, and then you still like that content message thing, which is like an interpolated string, which really wasn't necessary at that point anyways, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, is that sort of the way you went forward, where basically your code base is just instrumented with events,
Yes.
independent of what you actually end up, okay.
That's exactly it. And I really like Charity Major's take on this whole observability thing, which is at the root of everything, it's events. It's events all the way down. This is why event source systems would be an absolute dream to instrument and to be observable, because you just listen to Kafka, you shove all of that in your traces or logs, and everything's good. The only caveat to that is when it comes to traces, as I mentioned before, you do need the higher levels of context. So when you're talking about that, it's not quite as simple as just events, because you need some context to pass into that event. It's still very possible. That's the only slight nuance to that I would add, but absolutely. And in fact, I started making an architecture such that we could have a value object which is represented by, it's essentially just a basic value object to represent an event. And then we have an event.publish that puts it onto an active support notifications queue. And then there's a listener that listens to that can send it to Datadog or Segment or PostHog or any of these things, any observability tool and any analytics tool. And that would be my dream. If we could pull that off, man, we'd be in such a great place, because you could just have this stream of events and say, I want to fire these off to Datadog or Dynatrace or any other observability tool, and we could have these other events firing them off to analytics. Again, that's a really big discussion, but thanks for a great question.
Okay. Thank you very much, John Gallagher, ladies and gentlemen.